Hi, everyone. My name is Sandra Lilienthal, and I'm a Jewish educator in the South Florida area. I am thrilled to be part of the 2017 Global Day of Jewish Learning. I hope you'll enjoy our session today, and I urge you to join learners from across the world on November 12th, which is a Sunday, to learn more about the topic for this year, beauty and ugliness. So here's what I would like to do. For the next 50 minutes or so, we'll see how this goes. We're going to learn together how beauty and power are related in biblical stories. We're going to have some sources that we will use. You can download the source sheet you have online, but also as I present the sources, they will be put online. There you go. And for this, I have to thank both Karen Sponder and Lily Meyer, who are the ones who make all of this happen. Also, I will probably stop once or twice during our session for questions. So if you have questions, just send them in through the chat area, and I'll answer them when we stop for questions. So here we go. First thing I would say is that the definition of what is beautiful or not is probably cultural, which means that unless the Bible tells me what beautiful means, I cannot really picture the person. In different eras, in different times, in different cultures, beauty was being fat or beauty was being skinny. A beautiful person was tall, or maybe a beautiful person was short. Were blue eyes pretty or were black eyes pretty? Long hair or short hair? So the definition changes. That's the first thing that I want to point out. The second thing I want to point out is, why on earth would the Bible tell me somebody is beautiful? I mean, you would expect religious texts not to spend too much time on physical characteristics. But for some reason, there are over 20 biblical characters that are named as handsome or beautiful in the Bible. If my counting is correct, it's 22, but it's over 20. Both men and women. And a lot of these are in positions of power, which then leads us to the next question. Is beauty something you need to achieve power? Or does it help you get to a position of power? Even more so, can beauty ever become a problem, or is it always a positive asset? And regarding the power situation, there's another question that I'm forced to ask, which is being powerful what leads to being beautiful? So if you understand what I want to say here is, do we perceive somebody as beautiful because they are in a position of power? All of those questions will be addressed in the next 50 minutes to an hour by reading some of our texts. So I'm going to start with text number 1, and I want to put it in context. This is when the people of Israel go to the prophet Samuel, and they say to him, look, we want a king. And why do they want a king? Because everybody else has a king. Now, the Bible had already told us that this is a really bad idea, and Samuel wants to resist because he knows it's not good for the Jewish people to have a king. However, Samuel asks God what to do, and this is where we start our source. Vayomer Hashem el Shmuel, and God said to Samuel, Shma b'kolam, listen to them. V'himlachta lahem melech, and appoint a king for them. So Samuel is going to go into exactly that. But who's the king? Where is he going to find a king? And then the Bible says to us, there was a man of the tribe of Benjamin whose name was Kish, son of Aviel, son of Zeror, son of Bechurat, son of Afiah, a Benjaminite, a man of substance. And the Hebrew word here, which is important because it's going to come back in a different source, is Gibor Chayil, which here the text translates as a man of substance. I have another translation with me. It's always good when we study Bible to have different translations. This other translation says that he was a mighty man of valor. So I'm not really sure what that means, but this man has a son, and this son's name is Saul. So Shaul in Hebrew is presented to us as an excellent young man. No one among the Israelites was handsomer than he. He was a head taller than any of the people. Here again, I want to call your attention to a couple of words. In the Hebrew, you will see that the word tov is used twice. So it says that the son Shaul, Bachur Vatov, he is young and he is good, the word tov meaning good. Ve'ein ish mibnei Israel tov mimenu. And there is no person among the children of Israel that is as tov as him. And as you will see, even though the translation says excellent for the first tov, for the second tov, it says he was handsomer. And then it even explains what that means. He was a head taller than any of the people. So we know that at this time in this culture, being a head taller made somebody be considered handsome. We also know that somehow our translators, our interpreters, understood that the first tov related to his character, but the second tov means that he is beautiful. Let me go to text 2. And text 2 is almost the parallel story. What happens now is we know Saul is going to die. He's not going to be king forever. And Samuel needs to look for a new king. So he goes out, and one of the attendants, one of the people that works for him, says, "Oh, I have observed a son of Jesse from Bethlehem. His name was David, who is skilled in music, is a stalwart fellow and a warrior, sensible in speech and handsome in appearance, and the Lord is with him." And here there are two things that I want to point out in terms of the Hebrew language. One of them is that, remember up there when I said that Gibor Chayil, that was translated as a man of substance, and I'm not really sure what that means. Well, here we see Gibor Chayil again. And in here, it's translated as a stalwart fellow. He's also a warrior. He's sensible in speech. And then we hear he's handsome in appearance. And there's a big question. I already heard that he's a musician. We already heard that he's a good warrior, that he's a good person in terms of talking. We already know that God is with him. Why do I need to be told that he is handsome? And the Art Scroll translation brings a very interesting comment that I want to throw out here because I think it applies a little bit to what we see in the world today. And it says, a king should always be remarkably handsome to inspire respect and loyalty. Let's think about this a little. If a leader is not handsome or is not beautiful, does that mean that he or she will not inspire respect and loyalty? And does it mean that every time somebody is handsome or beautiful, that will inspire respect and loyalty? It's an interesting comment, but it can't be completely thrown out because the truth is, for some reason, the Bible felt the need to tell me that these two, both Saul and David, were beautiful. So these are the first two sources that we're looking at. There's a parallel between them. I must say that in both cases, we are told that they're beautiful, but there's also something else being added. So in Saul's case, we are told that he was an excellent young man. And in David's case, we are told all about his musical skills and he's a good warrior, etc. Now, just so that we don't stick only to men, I want to move on to source 3. Source 3 is very well known to everyone. It's the story of Esther. And there's a slight point here that does make a difference. I think it makes an important difference, which is the fact that Esther is, again, presented as being beautiful. However, in this case, we already know from the start that you only would even participate in this beauty contest to see who's going to be the new queen if you were beautiful. So that adds an extra element that is important to keep in mind. So what's going on? I am basically telling the story without reading the source word by word. But the king, Ahasuerus, has thrown out his ex-wife Vashti from the palace because she, who apparently was also beautiful, but she did not want to come and show her beauty to the men at the banquet. So he decides he has to throw her out. And now he asks his servants, what should we do? And the servants say, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for your majesty. So it's clear that we're only looking for beautiful girls. In this case, Esther, who is going to end up being the queen, is not necessarily appointed to us as beautiful only because of how she's going to end up in power. But we already know that the king is only looking for beautiful girls. So of course we have the whole story, all of the young girls, beautiful young girls come, and how she's chosen, everybody is brought forth to the king, and then Esther, and I am reading from verse 16 in source 3, Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor more than all the virgins, and therefore she becomes the queen. But if you look at the verse that comes before 16, which is 7 in our source, we have it there very clear. The maiden was shapely and beautiful. So here again, we have a biblical character that is being described as beautiful. Questions that I would like to ask is, first of all, again, are they attractive because they're in power? Are they in power because they're attractive? Were they actually beautiful? Now, why am I asking this question? Not only because, as I said, what is beautiful is culturally different, but also because the fact that somebody writes down that they were beautiful doesn't necessarily mean they were beautiful, right? It is the opinion of the writer, or if you believe that the Bible was given by God word by word, then it is the opinion of God. And what is it that would make any one of us think that somebody is beautiful when maybe they're not? So does it depend on the power? Does it depend on the fact that we want to see them as beautiful? Let me give you an example. Do we want our leaders to be beautiful? So I'm going to take the example of Lady Diana because I think it's a great example. Would people go out of their way to say how beautiful she was before she became Lady Diana? Right? She was a pretty girl who, in our eyes, is beautiful or was beautiful. But I don't know that that definition of beautiful existed independently of her becoming the princess. So that's something for us to think about. The other thing that I want to point out is that Esther is chosen by a man, a king, human element, who is interested only in beauty. That shouldn't surprise us. I'm sure there are many people that choose others like this. But when we read text 1 and text 2, when we're talking about the choice of the kings of Israel, they're chosen by God. And the fact that they're chosen by God really raises the question, does God think that it's important to be beautiful in order to be a leader? Now, granted, in both sources, we are told that they have other characteristics, not just the beauty. And also there's a difference between text 1 and text 2. Text 1 only says one thing, says that he was a good person. Text 2 already starts with he had good speech and he's a warrior. So it seems that from Saul to David, more characteristics were pointed out to us. So now let's go to text 4. Text 4 is out of order here on purpose, meaning text 4 in the Bible comes before text 3. And what does it say? This is a very interesting and important text. Vayomer Hashem el Shmuel, and God says to Samuel, Al tabet al marehu el gvoa komato ki meastihu ki lo asher ire ha'adam ki ha'adam ire le'inaim v'Hashem ire lalevav. The Lord says to Samuel the prophet, look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For it is not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Now, this is when Samuel gets to the house of David and starts looking at all of the sons. And he starts with the first son, who is beautiful, who is tall. And Samuel's almost ready to say, hey, I have the next king. After all, that's what he had done with Saul. King Saul had been chosen because he was beautiful, he was handsome, and he was tall. And yet at this point, God says to him, hey, don't make the same mistake again. His height, his beautiful features, that does not mean anything. I have rejected him. And then God continues, God doesn't look at physical appearance. Humans do. God is looking inside, almost as if the Bible is sending us a message that although beauty, power, and although power attracts beauty, if we really want to be like God, we shouldn't take into consideration just the outward appearance. That's not what makes for a good leader. It's not what makes for a good king, and it's not what makes for any good leader. Even if, as the Art Scroll commentary had said, sometimes somebody who's beautiful commands more respect or loyalty, God's saying, yeah, but that doesn't really mean anything. And we shouldn't focus that much on the physical attributes of someone. Of course, if I were in a class interacting with people, one of the questions that I would ask is, what does it mean that the Lord looks on the heart? Right? What is the Lord looking for? I understand that it's the inside and not the outside, but what is he looking for? And I'm going to give an example of something that happens today, which I think sort of explains the source even better. When we are hiring somebody for a specific job, we're not looking at outward appearance, right? We're looking at, do you have the skills I need you to have to do your job well done? However, if we have two candidates in equal standing, one is what we would consider to be ugly, and one is what we would consider to be beautiful, in all likelihood, we would choose the beautiful one. So it might be that God's saying, there is an element of this that will happen always. You will always look at outward appearance. But please first focus on the heart, on the inside. Is that person that you are choosing for a job, for a position of power, is that person a good person? And I think that's what that word tov is doing in text 1 and text 2. Yes, it's translated as outward appearance and beautiful. Is it a good person? Beauty by itself is not what allows us to have a good leader. So I now want to go into part 2 of our session, which is, we have seen in part 1 how beauty and power are interconnected. And if we stay there, only in that area of texts, we would basically say that it's a good thing to be beautiful, right? It helps you get places in life. But then we're going to look at some other texts that will show us that sometimes being beautiful is actually detrimental. And I'm going to try to come to a conclusion with you. What is it that makes beauty be detrimental? Is it something we do, or is it something somebody else does? So we're going to look at a couple of texts. Text number 5 comes from the book of Genesis, And it is basically talking about Joseph. Now, we all know the story. Joseph is this little kid who tells on his brothers, and he's daddy's favorite, and he has these dreams of being amazing and great. The brothers get a little upset, to say the least, and they decide to first kill him. Then they change their mind and they sell him to a caravan of Ishmaelites that is on their way to Egypt. When he ends up in Egypt, he becomes a slave in the house of Potiphar. However, it seems that Potiphar really likes him, and I am now going to read from the text in English, starting from verse 6. He, that's Potiphar, left all that he had in Joseph's hands, and with him there he paid attention to nothing save the food that he ate. And then we hear, now Joseph was well built and handsome. And again, I have to say, why is that there? What difference does it make? It's clear to us already from this verse that Potiphar felt that Joseph was trustworthy, smart, and that he, Potiphar, could do whatever he wanted with his life because there was somebody else to take care of his business, and that was Joseph. But let's continue. After a time, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused. He said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here, my master gives no thought to anything in this house, and all that he owns he has placed in my hands. He wields no more authority in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except yourself, since you are his wife. How then could I do this most wicked thing and sin before God?" And much as she coaxed Joseph day after day, he did not yield to her request to lie beside her, to be with her. So up to here, we can see, A, that Joseph was beautiful, handsome. The only way I know that is because the text told me. But we also see that Joseph is in a position of power. His master, Potiphar, has basically given him all the power to the extent that he says, your husband has no more authority than I do. And the only thing that he can't touch is the wife. Continuing, one such day, he came into the house to do his work. None of the household being there inside. She caught hold of him by his garment and said, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and got away and fled outside. When she saw that he had left it in her hand and had fled outside, she called out to her servants and said to them, "Look, he had to bring us a Hebrew to dally with us. This one came to lie with me, but I screamed loud. And when he heard me screaming at the top of my voice, he left his garment with me and got away and fled outside." She kept his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the same story, told her husband what he had done, obviously her version of the story. And when his master heard the story that his wife told him, namely, "Thus and so your slave did to me," he was furious. So Joseph's master had him put in prison where the king's prisoners were confined. If we look at this story, we start, and it's only a few verses, but we start with Joseph being as powerful can be, in spite of the fact that he's a slave. But he has the same authority that his owner has. And because of his beauty, the wife wants him to sleep with her. He says no, and then he ends up in prison. I don't know about you, but when I read this story, I don't see any wrongdoing on Joseph's part. I mean, it's not his fault that he's beautiful. It's not his fault that he's handsome. It's not his fault that he's well built. It's not his fault that Potiphar's wife apparently is not too happy with her husband and wants him. There is nothing that he did wrong, or at least it seems to us by just reading the text. But as you know, we never read only the text. We also read the commentaries that accompany the text. So if you go now to text 6, this is Rashi's commentary on this story. Rashi picks up on the question that I had asked earlier on, not because I'm that smart, but because everybody asks that question, which is, why did I have to be told that Joseph was of beautiful form? That seemed to be irrelevant. But Rashi says, why is that there? Because we have to know that as soon as Joseph saw that he was the ruler in the house, he began to eat and drink and curl his hair. And then, says Rashi, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Joseph, your father is mourning and you curl your hair? I will let a bear loose against you. And he refers to Midrash Tanhuma, which we will look at next. But before we get there, I'll ask a question. What is Rashi trying to tell us? So Rashi is referring to the fact that when Joseph was sold, the brothers took his technicolor coat, as the Broadway play would tell us, dipped it into blood, brought it to Jacob, the father, and Jacob assumed that Joseph had been killed. And he's in mourning. As his father is in mourning, Joseph ends up in Egypt, gets to a position of power, and according to Rashi, as soon as he gets to that position of power, he begins eating, drinking, and being concerned with his physical appearance. That's why, says Rashi, we are told that he was a beautiful form. If we go to the Midrash to which Rashi referred, and just giving a couple of explanations in terms of the Midrash. Midrash Tanhuma is a collection of stories and discussions based on the Torah, believed to have been compiled in the 16th century in Constantinople, with a later edition published in the late 19th century. So just putting there in terms of when this Midrash is going to come. So look at this. When his master became aware of this, aware of what? Of what Joseph was doing in his house. He entrusted him with the keys of the household and concerned himself no longer with any household matters. As it said, behold, my master, having me, knoweth not what is in the house. As soon as he realized his own importance, that's Joseph now, he began to eat, drink, and curl his hair, which is exactly what Rashi had told us, and say, blessed be he, the omnipotent one, who has caused me to forget my father's house. Whereupon the Holy One, blessed be he, rebuked him, saying, your father mourns for you in sackcloth and ashes, but you eat and drink and curl your hair? Therefore, your mistress will impose herself on you and will torment you. Hence it is written, his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, but he refused. A couple of important things to point out here. Number one, in Rashi, we read that he said, the Holy One said, I will let a bear loose against you. But we weren't told what that means. Midrash Tanhuma apparently is much more clear. And it says, because of what you did, your mistress will impose herself on you and will torment you. That was the bear. The bear is Potiphar's wife. More than that, there's a connection that is made by this Midrash, basically showing us the following. When somebody is in mourning, they are unkempt, right? He's mourning. Jacob is dressed in sackcloth. He has ashes over him. It is the opposite of somebody grooming himself, which is what Joseph is doing. Joseph is sitting in front of a mirror, curling his hair. How insensitive. But that's not what we are discussing. What we are discussing is not the sensitive or insensitive, but how power and beauty are intertwined. Joseph knew that he was handsome before he ended up in Egypt. That's not new. He was handsome when he was young. He was handsome when he lived with his brothers. He's put in a position of being a slave, and he's obviously not concerned with his beauty. But what happens when he gets to a position of power? At that point, he seems to forget everything else and becomes a vain person. Isn't that interesting that it is after he becomes vain that, according to the Midrash and according to Rashi, something is going to happen and his power is going to be completely removed from him and he ends up in prison. So is this Midrash telling us, and Rashi, that it's okay to be careful with your appearance? There is nothing wrong with taking care of our bodies. In fact, Judaism does say that our body is a gift from God and that we should take good care of our body. It's actually a mitzvah, a commandment, but there's a limit to this. When you focus on your beauty, that becomes vanity, and vanity is not something that our texts seem to think is good. So that's an interesting addition to what we had discussed before. I also want to put a question in here that is, when people trust too much on their outside appearance, right? When people use their beauty to achieve something, their physical beauty to achieve something, how do we think they feel? Do they really feel valued? Or do you think that it might lead them to believe that people look at me and care for me because of my appearance, but they're not really seeing who I am? Our bodies are not who we are. So when that becomes the center of attention, does that take away from who we are? These texts all seem to show us that there are times when beauty can be used as a tool to achieve something we desire. But when it comes to a point where what it achieves is flattery, adoration, etc., is that giving us the power that we would like to have over other people? Or is that power coming through somebody else's desire? Or is it an illusion? You can sway people in their desire for you, but the power over others can quickly be removed, which is what happened with Joseph and Potiphar's wife. All the power that he has was quickly removed because all she cared about was having a sexual relationship with him, nothing else. She didn't see him for who he was. She saw him for his body. So I want to stop for a couple of minutes and see if there are any questions. Feel free to put them in the chat box, and Lily will either send them to me or she will just ask the questions herself. I'll give us a couple of minutes to see if we have questions. If not, I'll move on to the next part. Okay, I'm going to move on to part 3, but if you have questions during part 3, just send them in, and if they relate to what we saw until now, that's perfectly okay as well. Okay, I have a question here. So does beauty in the case of Joseph hide who he was? Is his goodness clouded by his beauty? Great question. And I think this is a two-part question, right? Does he see himself as beautiful and value himself for being beautiful? I don't think so. I think Joseph values himself from the very beginning of the story, when we remember that he had these dreams that obviously had come from a higher source, and he sees that he one day is going to be powerful. I think he understands that there's more to it than just the outward beauty. However, his beauty might not have helped him. His beauty might have been detrimental to him. And I think that is the main point of the text that we were reading, that Rashi points out and Midrash Tanhuma points out, that sometimes being beautiful is wonderful, and sometimes being beautiful can cloud even your own understanding of who you are. If you know that you have a mission in the world, which Joseph knew he had a mission, right? But suddenly he's in front of a mirror curling his hair. Has he forgotten that there's so much more to him than beauty? And I think that's what the texts are telling us, that beauty sometimes is a negative trait only because it can distract you from who you really are and from what you should really be doing. Joseph had a lot to do. He was in charge of Potiphar's house. That was no easy task. He didn't have time, or shouldn't have time, to be curling his hair as if this was one of the most important things he had to do. Sitting and eating and drinking and curling his hair. So I think this is what we are being told to watch out for. Don't let beauty cloud your vision of who you are and what you have to offer. Even if you are beautiful, I'm sure there's a lot more that you have to offer to the world than just beauty. So the next text that we're going to read is a very troubling text. And I imagine that a lot of people know about the story, but I just want to give a little context here. We are talking now about the story between David, who is now king, and Bathsheba. So I'm going to read the story the way we have it in our texts, with not all the whole story, but the important parts of it. We have it right there in text number 8. And then I am going to ask a couple of questions. So here's the story. Late one afternoon, David rose from his couch and strolled on the roof of the palace. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. In this case, the reason why we are told she's very beautiful is clearly understood because of what is going to come later. It's also important to know that David's army is actually fighting a war, and he did not go with them to war. He's sitting back at home, probably a little bored. So he's just strolling on the roof of his palace, and then he sees this beautiful woman bathing. Instead of simply enjoying and saying, how beautiful is this woman? Verse 3, and the king sent someone to make inquiries about the woman. This person comes back and says, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam and wife of Uriah the Hittite. Also interesting, Uriah is one of the most important men in David's army. Very unlikely that he did not know who his wife was. That's number one. Number two, there's a woman that is living in such proximity to the palace. It's also interesting that David doesn't know who she is. And there is the possibility that the text wants to show us how sometimes when you're looking at a body, there is a total disconnect with who that person is. Verse 4, David sent messengers to fetch her. She came to him, of course. The king calls you. You don't have a choice. And he lay with her. She had just purified herself after her period, and she went back home. So here's this woman who had gone to the mikveh, at least this is what we're being told, and is in her own house. The king sees her, the king wants her, and the king does what powerful men have done over and over again. I want her, I will have her. He has her called into the palace, and he has sex with her. Now, I don't know that it's rape, but I doubt that this was consensual. Probably David wasn't counting on the fact that the woman conceived. And this is, by the way, one of the things I point out every time we're learning Bible. It seems to me that women in the Bible are either barren and take 20 years to conceive, or boom, first try, they're pregnant. So here Bathsheba is. She had this one relationship with David, and she's pregnant. And she sends word to David, I'm pregnant. Now, David has a problem because obviously if her husband, Uriah, is fighting a war and is not home, she can't be pregnant. David has to find a way to fix the problem. So he has this brilliant idea. David sent a message to Yoav, send Uriah the Hittite to me. And this way, Uriah is sent back home. David basically says to him, hey, I think it's time for you to have some rest. Why don't you go home? Why don't you spend the night with your wife? David here is thinking, okay, he's going to spend the night with his wife. And when they find out that she's pregnant, nobody's going to think anything about this. Her husband came home and she got pregnant. The problem is that Uriah refuses to do so. So when David was told that Uriah had not gone down to his house, he said to Uriah, you just came home from a journey. Why didn't you go down to your house? And this is the answer he gets from his general. Well, the ark and Israel and Judah are located at Sukkot, and my master Yoav and your majesty's men are camped in the open. How can I go home and eat and drink and sleep with my wife? As you live by your very life, I will not do this. He's saying, I can't be, home, having some rest, enjoying my wife, when everybody else is out there fighting a war. So in the morning, David sees that this is not going to work. He has to have plan B, and he writes a letter to Yoav, which he sends with Uriah. So please note, Uriah is the one carrying the letter that he's going to hand to Yoav. And in the letter, what does it say? Place Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest. Then fall back so that he may be killed. So when Yoav was besieging the city, he stationed Uriah at a point where he knew that there were able warriors. The men of the city sallied out and attacked Yoav, and some of David's officers among the troops fell. And oh my gosh, guess who died? Now, I don't know about you, but this story is a very difficult one. This is the man that we had been told was a good person. This is the man that had been chosen by God to be the next king. Not only the next king, but the king whose kingdom will last forever. And this almost holy man, what does he do? He sees beauty, he lusts, and he just goes after it. Regardless of the fact that now, in order to save his image, he has to have her husband killed. The end of the story is after the husband is killed, Bathsheba ends up marrying David. This child actually dies. It's almost like a godly punishment for what David did. But they then have another child, and that ends up being Solomon, who becomes the next king. So a question to ask about this story. Do we see how beautiful people get to power? Do we see how powerful people become vain and take too much care of their outside, as in the case of Joseph? And now, do we see how powerful people go after beautiful people and do whatever needs to be done, including getting someone killed, just in order to have that beauty? And here I have to ask again, is being beautiful good or bad? For Bathsheba, I don't think it was good. For Joseph, it distracted him. David, being beautiful, didn't help him control his instincts. So we now move to our last text. This is text 9 from Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who, as you know, is behind the Global Day of Jewish Learning. And he's talking about transgression with a beautiful text that actually comes in really well when just yesterday, Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik published an article on comparing David to modern politicians. So let's read text 9 together, and then I'll bring in Rabbi Soloveitchik's comment. It is not possible objectively to compare men in terms of their transgression, because this is not the correct gauge of worth. One should compare them on the basis of the degree of effort required to overcome temptation. What for one person is a terrible temptation on account of his personality or history is for another of no import whatsoever. For a gambler, playing cards has a different weight than for someone who has never played. It is always easier to tell someone to overcome a wrong impulse. The question is whether I myself can do as much, even if I am a very righteous person. It is not necessarily a matter of correcting conspicuously appalling sin, but rather of the ordinary virtuous man's capacity to flee from the passionate urges of his own heart, to avoid the evils of slander and other such seemingly trivial modes of behavior like thoughtless speech and careless dealing in money matters. What's Rabbi Steinsaltz trying to tell us? I'll give you an example from my personal life. I don't like donuts. So if I am on a diet and you put a plate of donuts in front of me, it's very easy for me to resist temptation. There is no temptation there. I can just say, oh, thank you very much. If you put a plate of chocolate in front of me, that is a whole other story, because chocolate I really love. And that's where my temptation is. Now, somebody sitting right next to me might have the exact opposite situation. Each of us has temptations. Each of us has difficulty in certain areas and not in others. What Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik said in his article yesterday was that he didn't think it's fair to compare King David to modern leaders, although most of us do, because there's a big difference. And the difference is not in what the sin is as much as in the ability to overcome and to repent for such a sin. I want to explain this in a little better way. King David is called upon the prophet Nathan at this point, who basically says to him that he did a terrible thing with the Bathsheba episode. And instead of trying to justify his behavior, which he could have done, which modern politicians do, he really stops, thinks, and says, I acted in a wrong way. And he asks forgiveness, not from Nathan the prophet, but from God. In one of the Psalms, David writes a beautiful pouring out of his heart with how sorry he is for what he did and how wrong it was. And Rabbi Steinsaltz is basically bringing that in. So I would ask, when we look at Joseph or when we look at David, does Rabbi Steinsaltz's text help us understand the overcoming of temptation? How difficult it might have been to Joseph to overcome the temptation of being powerful and spending time eating and drinking and curling his hair? Does it make us understand how for King David that was a difficulty? Do these biblical characters seem any better in our eyes after this? I will point out that according to Jewish tradition, both Joseph and David are considered to be very special. Joseph is called a tzaddik, a righteous person. David is considered one of the most important kings of Jewish history, and from whom ultimately the Messiah will come. So it's clear to me that Judaism did not consider these men to be horrible men. However, the sources that we looked at point out to how difficult it can be to separate beauty from power. Thank you, Lily. That's the article up there that Lily just put up from Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik. That was an article published yesterday in Mosaic, yesterday or 2 days ago in Mosaic. I don't know, Lily, if you can put the link up in the chat box, but if you can, that would be great. So to wrap this whole session up, I think there are a few questions that stay with us that we should take some time to discuss with our friends, with our families. How do these stories, the stories that we read, whether it is Esther or whether it is Joseph or David or Saul, all these stories that we read, how do they show to us the relationship between beauty and power and temptation? And then I would take it a step further, because I do believe that the holiness in our texts is not dependent on who we believe wrote these texts. The holiness of these texts is dependent on if they still speak to us today. And I could not think of anything that would be more relevant in the 21st century that these stories about how power and beauty mix, how it can be dangerous when we cannot limit our vanity, our temptations. And I think that if we can take any practical lessons from the text that we have learned today, we are doing that with Jews have been doing for the last many years, which is going back to our original source and learning from it who we are, what our faults are, what our greatnesses are, and how we can bring this into our daily lives, even so many centuries after these sources were given. So I hope you enjoyed our learning. And please feel free to send in questions through the chat, because we still have some time, and I will receive the questions from Lily. Are we supposed to ignore beauty? No, I don't think so. Beauty is God-given, as is everything else. In fact, there is another unit in our curriculum, so you will have to join us November 12th. There's another unit that discusses if ugliness is also God-given. So beauty should not be ignored. Everything that we have, every talent that we have should be we should be thankful for, should be used in the best way that we can. There is nothing that God gave us that is negative per se. What becomes negative is what we do with it. Right? So, as an example, being strong could be really good. If we're using our strength to hit everybody we meet, then obviously that's not good. It's not the strength per se that is not physical strength that is good or bad. It's what we do with it. Beauty can be wonderful. It does help sometimes in life. As I said, Joseph ends up where he is, probably not because of his beauty, but I don't know. When you think of the slave market, were slaves chosen also because they were beautiful, handsome? Maybe. But that's not important. It's what you do with it. Can you use beauty in a way that is helpful not only to you, but to everybody else around you? So is it okay for Joseph to be so concerned with his physical appearance? Probably not. Is it okay for Joseph to be thankful for being handsome because God gave him that and that is helping him get places? Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. I have another question. Do you think if Joseph was attracted to Potiphar's wife, he would have given in to her wishes? It's a good question. I don't think Joseph would have given in. I actually think that he was probably attracted to her. I imagine that she was a beautiful woman because otherwise Potiphar probably wouldn't have chosen her. But I don't know that Joseph wasn't attracted to her as much as Joseph could not imagine that what happened would happen. And in his mind, I think, in his mind, if he fell into her trap, that would be the end of him. I don't think he thought, if I don't do this, if I resist temptation to do this, as Rabbi Steinzel was talking about temptation, if I resist my temptation, I will most likely continue being important to this household because Potiphar will respect me and will like me, and I will continue having all the power that I have. However, if I sleep with her, then I'm going to lose my power. Did Esther really have power through her beauty? So I don't think Esther had any power through her beauty. I think Esther ended up in the place where she ended up because she was beautiful. She had no power. I do think, however, that she comes from a position of no power to a position of power using her brains, but also using her beauty. Had she been not beautiful, I don't know, would the king have said to her, tell me what you want, I will give you everything up to half of my kingdom? I'm not sure. So I think she did use a little bit of her beauty to get the king to call her in. But you're right, Esther is very different from the other cases, although I don't know other cases, but certainly from Saul and David, in that she only got to where she got because of her beauty, but for a big part of the story, she has no power. She can't open her mouth. She can't talk to her husband. She can only come when he calls her. She was basically just a fixture in his house. Do you think the Bible is saying that powerful people find it harder to resist temptation? I think the Bible is showing us examples of how difficult it is for powerful people to resist vanity. More than the temptation comes from, I think, this vanity. I am powerful and I can do whatever I want. If we look at this history, I'll get to that. I have a question here about beauty and modesty. I'll get to that in a second. So if we look at the history of the world, if we look at political leaders, and I don't want to point out to one or two because there's so many examples. You can choose which party, which country, which anything you basically want. Powerful people seem to think that because they are powerful, they can do whatever they want. And powerful people seem to think that if they want somebody who's beautiful, they should go for it. Why not? So there is this mix between power and beauty that we see in our daily lives or in the daily news that I think the Bible is cautioning us to pay attention to and not fall into that trap. Power and beauty do not have to be enmeshed in a way that is dangerous for everybody involved. You are in danger of losing your place. You are playing around with other people's lives. What David does with Bathsheba, you're playing somebody's life. So I think that's what the Bible is cautioning us. Nancy asked about beauty and modesty. And here again, I will urge you to attend November 12th. There is a unit in this year's Global Day of Jewish Learning where Rabbi Steinzel has a text that talks about modesty. And he basically says, and I'm sorry if I don't do justice to the text right now, but he basically says that we should show that which is beautiful, meaning that the idea of modesty is not that you have to hide yourself so that nobody can see your beauty. It is, however, linked to a certain respect for that beauty. So don't put yourself in a position where your beauty seems to be the only thing that you prize about yourself. I think that's the issue that is going to come over and over again in texts that we read in Judaism. Modesty, by the way, which has become almost only about physical appearance and how we dress. So every time we use the word tzniut, most people immediately think of clothes and how long your skirt has to be or how much do you have to cover of your body. But let's remember that tzniut is much, much more than that. It's what you say, how you act, right? I think that's the important element here. Beauty is not something to be hidden. God's talents are not something that we should hide. If you're smart, why should you hide that you're smart? However, if you only prize how smart you are, that's not going to make you a good person. So I think the question of modesty applies to all of our strengths. We should always use our strengths, whether it is physical strength, mental strength, beauty, whatever the strength is. But we should always make sure that we're not turning ourselves into somebody who is just that. There's so much more to life. Are you a good, well-rounded human being is what I think Bible and rabbinic texts tell us. If someone is already powerful, why do they want beauty? Does beauty bring them more power? I'm going to ask another question, right? Why is it that somebody who is powerful, who is already powerful, seems to feel that parading around with beauty will make them feel better? And I am going to use here an example of somebody that I know who taught me something very important in life, which is the problem with having power or having money or having beauty is that you never know if people are around you because of your power or your beauty or your money, or if they're around you because they actually like you. I do believe that people that are, and this is just my opinion, this is not Bible, I do believe that people that are in high positions of power many times feel that they don't really know who are their friends. There are a lot of people that are bowing down to them because of their position. I think that people who are beautiful probably have the same sense every now and then of, are people with me because I'm beautiful or because they love who I really am, my insides, or as we saw in that source, God says, I look at the heart, right? So are they with me because they love my heart or because they love my physical appearance? So I think these two things actually attract. There is a loneliness that is pervasive to both situations, a situation of power and a situation of beauty. The other thing, of course, is cultural more than anything else, but men like to be seen with beautiful women. That's just the reality. Is it right? No. Is it superficial? Yes. Does it happen? Yes. There's something that only people who are already at a more developed, I would say, level can look beyond the physical. Look, the idea that we don't judge a book by its cover, isn't that talking about exactly that? We look at the outside of something and you immediately have an impression of that. You look at a beautiful person, you put a beautiful person next to somebody who's really ugly, and your impression of these two people is very different. By the way, one of the Talmudic texts that is part of the whole unit of the Global Day of Jewish Learning talks exactly about this, that this person is walking on the streets and sees somebody ugly and assumes that that person is unlearned. Now, what does one thing have to do with the other? Like, you can only be smart and learned if you're handsome. I mean, of course, it's completely irrelevant. But the natural reaction is that. So I think powerful people want to be seen with beautiful people. And the difference here is that sometimes beautiful people want to be seen with powerful people. So it's like, you know, the peanut butter and the jelly, they're just getting together. I think that's what happens. Any other questions? Okay, so thank you so much for learning with me today. As I said, if you like the session, make sure to join us not only on the other live sessions, but on air, but also November 12th. It's a Sunday all across basically the world. There will be sessions on this unit of beauty. And it's really an honor and a privilege to be part of the 2017 Global Day of Jewish Learning. Thank you, everyone.